Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Daniel Bruno and I'm part of the Testing and Certifications technical staff here at Visa Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations, as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approval in Brazil. Brazil is one of the largest countries in the world and has a very developed equipment certification and approval process. In fact, this year there are many new changes to be implemented in the certification scheme, which we will touch on today. ANATEL is a national telecommunication agency of Brazil. This agency is responsible for all matters related to the operation of telecommunications and radio frequency equipment, and the application and utilization of the radio spectrum in Brazil. ANATEL plays a major role in the administration of the radio spectrum, including frequency bands required to meet the spectrum demands, authorization or licensing for the temporary use of radio frequencies, and the prevention of harmful interferences from equipment. The process of equipment certification, approval, and authorization is called homologation in Brazil. This is a process handled by ANATEL. Visa Laboratories is an EMC RF compliance test lab and product certification body and expert in global regulatory approvals for RF devices. So, today we'll primarily be going over the requirements of radio frequency and telecommunications approval in Brazil. In this webinar, we'll provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for approval and import into Brazil. If you have any questions on the topics presented today or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@visacompliance.com. So without further ado, let's begin the presentation. ANATEL, or Agência Nacional de Telecomunicações, is the national telecommunications agency of Brazil responsible for all matters related to the application and utilization of wireless telecommunications equipment in Brazil. ANATEL is responsible for matters such as implementation of telecommunications policies on a national level, management of the radio frequency spectrum in terms of resource allocation and regulation, issuance of technical standards and normatives for equipment use and utilization, to be followed by equipment operators or service providers issue or recognize product certifications. Although ANATEL is the telecommunications regulatory authority recognized by the International Telecommunications Union, ANATEL itself does not perform testing of products or wireless devices. ANATEL also doesn't issue certificates for telecom products. What ANATEL does do is homologation. Homologation is handled by ANATEL. It's a process where the ANATEL agency recognizes the certificates of conformity issued by the certification bodies for telecommunication products. This recognition is done through the publishing of a homologation code in ANATEL's website, with reference to the certification of conformity issued by the certification body. We will describe the major components of this approval process in a later slide. Here's a look at the major components involved in the approval process. As we mentioned before in the last slide, although ANATEL is a national agency of telecommunications and responsible for matters related to the application and utilization of telecommunication products in Brazil, ANATEL is only responsible for the homologation and is not in charge of the certification or testing of the product. Homologation is handled by ANATEL and is a process of ANATEL recognizing certificates of conformity issued by the OCDs for telecommunication products. This recognition is done through the publishing of a homologation code in ANATEL's website, with reference to the certificate of conformity issued by the OCD. OCDs are a certification body designated by ANATEL. OCDs are independent from ANATEL and evaluates and certifies products based on the results of laboratory testing. OCDs can assist in laboratory selection, product sample delivery, schedule management, document collection, product evaluation, and certification filing. These organizations are responsible for the technical and documental evaluation of the product, with the objective of certifying it according to the current ANATEL rules. They oversee certifications and follow ANATEL procedures to review and issue certificates of conformity for telecommunications products. Testing laboratories as per Brazil technical regulations and issues test reports for a complete technical review by OCDs and ANATEL. So as we understand, according to Brazilian regulations, telecommunication products to be sold and used in Brazil must have a certificate of conformity issued by a designated certification body, or OCD, indicating that they comply with Brazilian regulatory requirements. This certificate must also be approved/homologated by ANATEL. This process is shown here. Initially, the certification body determines the requirements based on the technical characteristics of the device. The applicant provides samples which are tested per applicable regulations in the in-country test center. Upon testing complete, the certification body reviews the results and issues a certificate to the applicant. Further, all technical documents are transmitted to ANATEL for. It is important to note that for imported products, the manufacturer must have a local representative, established according to Brazilian legislation, who will be responsible for supplying the products and providing warranties in Brazil. Their information is provided to ANATEL as well. Upon review, more information may be requested from the applicant. ANATEL will finally issue the homologation certification authorizing the product to be placed on the market. Depending on the product type, surveillance will be performed every 1 or 2 years to ensure the device continues to comply with regulations. ANATEL promotes development of Brazil's telecom infrastructure by exercising standardization, homologation, and surveillance. ANATEL is a telecommunications regulating agency in Brazil. Products that connect to the public telephone network, such as network routers with E1 WAN ports, Wi-Fi 802.11 A, B, G, or N access points, GSM and CDMA cellular phones, network switches, as well as satellite, Bluetooth, and Zigbee products require ANATEL type approval to commercialize in Brazil. ANATEL recognizes 3 categories of products. Category 1, terminal equipment intended for use by the general public for purposes of accessing collective interest telecommunications services. Category 2, products but which make use of the electromagnetic spectrum for the transmission of signals, which equipment includes antennas and those products characterized in specific regulations as restricted radiation radiocommunication equipment. Category 3 are products not contained in the previous 2 categories, but regulations still require them to assure the interoperability of networks that support telecommunications services, assure the reliability of networks that support the telecommunications services, and/or assure electromagnetic compatibility and electrical safety. Last October, ANATEL announced that this system will be changed from a category classification via the product category list 1, 2, or 3 into a classification of technical requirements by product type of family of products. The technical requirements will define the conformity assessment models applicable to the type or family of telecommunications product, testing applicable, renewal definition, etc. Currently, this is still being developed. As of now, the product category classifications are still valid, so on the next few slides, we will provide the concrete examples of each product category. Product Category 1 consists of traditional telecommunications terminal equipment intended for use by the general public for purposes of accessing collective interest telecommunications services. Product types include lithium batteries, for example those used in mobile phones, chargers such as cell phone chargers or AC-DC adapters used with cell phones, cables or cords such as flexible coaxial UTP, SCP, cordless phones, wired phones, telephones, and UMTS devices, modems, and fax modem machines. Products falling under this category require annual renewal, so certificates are valid for 1 year. Approval for equipment in Category 1 requires in-country product testing, as well as evaluation of the factory's quality system. Product Category 2 consists of radio frequency equipment and wireless devices which make use of the RF spectrum for the transmission of signals. This includes antennas and those products characterized in specific regulations as restricted radiation radio communication equipment. These products are not covered under the definition of Category 1. Some examples of products in these types include directional and omnidirectional antennas, RF power amplifiers, transmitters, radio broadcasting equipment for television, and radio frequency equipment, and devices such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFID, NFC, radars, etc. Category 2 device approvals are valid for 2 years and require renewal every 2 years. Compliance testing of the products in Brazil is required. Product Category 3 consists of equipment not contained in the definitions of Category 1 and 2, and that will have interoperability with telecommunication network and require assurance for telecommunication network services or electromagnetic compatibility and electrical safety. Examples of products here would be cables such as coaxial, hybrid, fiber optic, multiplexers, data network equipment, and switches, hubs, or gateways. Certification of Category 3 products are valid until the device is modified or until there is a change in the regulation. In-country compliance testing is still required here. There are a few approval schemes for RF devices in Brazil, 2 of which are declaration and 3 of which are certification. For declaration of conformity, applicants must indicate the regulations applicable to the product and certify that the product is in conformity with applicable regulations or rules. DUCs with test reports mean the application must be considered in conjunction with the reports issued by the laboratory chosen by the applicant in accordance with all the tests required for purposes of demonstrating of conformity. A certification of conformity based on type approval tests can be issued to an applicant by the OCD or certification body, which certifies a particular product's conformity with the applicable regulations. CUC with type approval tests and assessments include periodic performance of tests using product samples collected from the production line or commercial establishments to allow for the monitoring of the products such as the continued certified technical characteristics are maintained. CUC with quality system assessment requires testing, periodic assessment, as well as quality system assessment. So we just talked about the different conformity assessment schemes, and again, they are shown here. 1. In general, declaration of conformity is a conformity assessment scheme applicable to homemade products intended for an individual use, which does not grant the right to authorize the commercialization of the product in the country. 2. In exceptional cases such as new technology where it may take more than 3 months to issue the DOC, declaration of conformity with an accompanying test report is available. 3. CUC based on type approval tests is a conformity assessment certification scheme that applies to Category 3 products. 4. CUC based on type approval tests and periodic assessment of the product is the conformity assessment certification scheme applicable to Category 2 radio frequency products. 5. CUC based on quality management system assessment or factory assessment is the conformity assessment certification scheme applicable to Category 1 telecommunications products. This may be replaced by an ISO 9000 certification. There are 2 certificates for RF devices. 1. ANATEL homologation certificate, which is issued by ANATEL, does not have an expiration date, and is issued to a local representative or certificate holder. 2. OCD Technical Certificate, issued by OCD or designated certification body, may have expiration date depending on product and typically issued to the manufacturer or owner of design. Moving on to other conformity assessment rules, for family model approvals, it's necessary to check on a case-by-case basis. Detailed internal and external photos of all models that compose the family is required. We need to present pictures both internally and externally, and a letter of similarity, explaining the similarities and the differences between the models. If the models, for example, are different externally, but use the same RF module, it's possible to perform complete testing for one of the modules, an example RF, EMC, and safety, and just a few additional tests on the other models, an example EMC and safety. This is just an example for your reference. In order to confirm precisely, we need to check the cases specifically. Products must also belong in the same category. Final judgment of family model grouping is made by ANATEL. Additionally, devices marketed under different names is permitted by ANATEL. ANATEL has very particular rules governing modular approvals. It is allowable, but in most cases does not replace getting an approval for a host device. The benefit of attaining a modular approval is being able to use the same RF report and results for being different host devices. In general, modular approval by itself is sufficient in the case when the host device is not a telecommunications device, such as air conditioning unit with Bluetooth functions. The Declaration of Conformity is a conformity assessment scheme applicable to homemade products intended for individual use, but does not grant the right or authorize the commercialization of the product in the country. This is not a common equipment approval scheme used by most applicants. DOCs are valid for 5 years. The Declaration of Conformity with accompanying test reports is a conformity assessment scheme applicable in exceptional cases where the designated certification bodies establish a length of greater than 3 months for the completion of the process for issuing the certification of conformity, not including the period required to perform tests, as a result of which cases ANATEL shall undertake to direct the necessary conformity assessment. Reports are prepared by the test lab chosen by the applicant and should cover all required tests for demonstrating conformity. DOCs with test reports are valid for 2 years. That wraps it up for the approval schemes under Declaration of Conformity. Next, we will take a look at the more common schemes under Certification of Conformity. Now let's take a look at what is required for certification. Information on the manufacturer, applicant, and factory such as corporation's name, address, tax number, contact name, email, and contact number are required. The technical product specification containing the technical characteristics of the product such as frequency range, technology, modulation, power type, installation environment, etc. is required. A technical manual containing the product model identification, manufacturer, and operational description is required. Schematics and block frames. If the electrical schematics cannot be provided for confidential reasons, a declaration of electrical schematic confidentiality should be included in the application. Internal and external photos are required. These should allow reviewers to clearly identify a product example or product sample. Regarding product labeling requirements, photos of the label must be provided which shows the ANATEL label placement and location on the device. The label should also contain the model number that identifies the product, the manufactured country of origin, and the name of the manufacturer. The user manual is required if the product is intended for the general public user. It must be in Brazilian Portuguese, including the relevant information regarding the regulatory bodies, technical regulations, and measurement standards. If the user manual is not intended for the general public, then Spanish or English versions are acceptable. In this case, a declaration of the product's technical use is required. Test reports based on each test done on the sample sent by the manufacturer/client. These tests must have been performed as per the current and applicable regulations. A certificate of conformity issued by the certification body will be required for the ANATEL homologation. Product's model name or number, country of origin, and the manufacturer's information will be included in the certificate of conformity and certificate of homologation. The ISO 9001 certificate is required and applicable to Category 1 products, or, no matter which category, when there is more than one factory. If the letter is written in a foreign language, it must be translated into Portuguese. As we know, foreign companies interested in performing equipment homologation must have their own local representative in Brazil able to assume the responsibilities of commercialization of the product in the country. When the manufacturer doesn't have an address in Brazil, we must provide documentation showing that there is a local representative responsible for the commercialization. Technical assistance and supply of spare parts of the product in Brazil. These documents must also be in Portuguese. Similarity letters are required for declaring the similarities and differences of multiple models being certified as a family. Family grouping is verified on a case-by-case basis, and we must show detailed internal and external pictures as well as the letter of similarity. The documentation presented must make reference to the specific model of product that is under approval. We can expect the certificate to take up to 1 week upon completion of all testing and provision of all documents. As we all know by now, ANATEL homologation process is based on the results of in-country testing to show that the product complies and technical conforms to the applicable Brazilian regulations. Samples for testing must show model name, country of origin, and the manufacturer's name. This information will be included in the certificate of conformity and certificate of homologation. The samples and its labels will be recorded and pictures will be taken. We require at least 2 units for testing and verification. More than 2 samples can be required depending on the product type and application, determined on a case-by-case basis. The sample must be configured with at least 1 type of each interface on the sample products that will be marketed in the final device. All software, hardware, accessories, device for peripherals, and computers necessary for the execution of the test must be provided. The manufacturer or supplier in Brazil must be available and ready to provide technical support for the correct and complete execution of the testing. We can generally assume testing to take up to 4 weeks, but will depend on the product complexity. A specific case is battery testing, which may take many months and require over 50 samples. The certification of conformity based on type approval tests is the conformity assessment certification scheme that applies to Category 3 telecommunications products. Again, these are devices that ensure interoperability with the telecom network. For this approval, the certification body must base its decisions on the results of the type approval test performed in accordance with the applicable regulations, and on the basis of the evaluation of the test reports. If the conformity has been demonstrated, then it's possible to issue the certification of conformity. If conformity has not been demonstrated through findings, then the certification body provides the applicant with a list of the non-conformities identified in the product during the conformity assessment that must be corrected in order to fulfill the conformity requirements. The non-conformity items represent technical requirements that must be met, as determined in the certification body's certification program. The certification of conformity based on type approval tests and periodic assessments is the conformity assessment certification scheme that applies to Category 2 RF devices. These are radio frequency equipment and wireless devices which make use of the RF spectrum for the transmission of signals. In addition to the requirements of the last slide, a contract specifying the periodic performance of tests using product samples collected from the production line or commercial establishments so as to permit the monitoring of such product in a manner that makes it possible to certify that the technical characteristics on which its certification is based are being maintained. The certification of conformity based on quality system assessment is the conformity assessment certification scheme that applies to Category 1 telecommunications devices. These are traditional telecommunications terminal equipment intended for use by the general public for purposes of accessing collective interest telecommunications services. In addition to the requirements of both of the last two slides, certification of conformity through quality system assessment also requires periodic testing on product samples collected from the production line or commercial establishments for purposes of monitoring and maintaining the characteristics on which the product certification is based, as well as manufacturer's quality system assessment for the product which certification is desired. Assessment of the manufacturer's quality system takes into consideration the procedures necessary for the continuous maintenance of the technical characteristics on which the product certification is based, pursuant to the established rules governing certification. So that covers the certification schemes available under ANATEL and includes an intro into the different approval schemes for RF devices in Brazil. Moving on, we will discuss other relevant general requirements. The ANATEL labeling and marking requirements are shown here. Homologated products must have ANATEL's identification seal legibly and indelibly affixed to them. The HHHHH identifies the product authorization by means of a numerical series of characters. The AA is a year. The FFFFF identifies a product manufacturer. In case that the product is too small, it is possible to issue a letter asking the authorization to put on the product only the ANATEL ID. Example, ANATEL: HHHHH-AA-FFFFF, and the complete label ANATEL logo plus ANATEL ID plus ANATEL applicable statements on the user manual. Other user manual warning statements may apply. For example, products tested for SAR either at 0 cm or greater than 0 cm require a special SAR declaration or statement in the user manual. The certification of conformity will have the following information: manufacturer, factory, and supplier information such as name and address, product identification, certification number, issuance, and expiration date. The expiration date will depend on the product category classification, applicable technical standard references, laboratory report and information, product technical specifications as shown in the test reports, product category, and type of product and application. As mentioned previously, homologation is required by ANATEL. This is the process of recording and recognizing the certificate of conformity, which was issued by the certification body, by the regulatory body ANATEL. In order to apply for the homologation of a certificate by ANATEL, the following documents and information must be supplied: product label, including ANATEL label placement location, product warranty information, user's manual, in Portuguese language is mandatory, certificate of conformity or COC issued by certification body, local representative information and documentation, and homologation certification authorization or agreement. Homologation can take anywhere for between 5 to 8 weeks. Here's a sample of the homologation certificate of conformity. DOCs are valid for 2 or 5 years, depending on whether there is a test report provided. For products subject to declaration of conformity, when applicable, a deadline of up to 6 months has been established after the new technical requirements comes into force to comply with the new requirements. For certifications, products in Category 1 maintain a 12-month validity period on their certificates. Category 2 have 2 years, and there's no expiration for Category 3 products. Product evaluations are performed during the validity period. Homologation certificates issued by ANATEL do not have an expiration date. It is mandatory to maintain the certificate validity as long as the product is being commercialized in Brazil. Renewals must be requested within 6 months of the expiration of its term of validity. In-country testing is required in renewals if there's a product change, there is EMC or test failure in original testing or non-conformity in the original certification or homologation, the product is applicable to safety requirements, or technical or regulation change. The documents for renewal are sample if testing if applicable, internal and external photos, declaration letter from manufacturer confirming no modifications occurred since original homologation. Please note that the certificate of conformity will be renewed, but the homologation certificate will remain the same. Revalidation or renewal for Category 3 devices is required only if ANATEL changes a regulation or if the customer changes the product. Telecommunications products may be submitted to a market supervision program, whose purpose is to verify the products approved by ANATEL still in compliance with the technical requirements. ANATEL will conduct this activity with the support of the Designated Certification Body, or OCD. Activities such as the use, employment, or connection of products that have not been authorized by ANATEL is prohibited. Additionally, the inappropriate use or modification of the technical characteristics of the product that leads to the operation of such products in a manner that does not conform with the technical characteristics on which the authorization is based on is not allowed. If this type of activity is discovered, sanctions may involve warnings, fines, suspension of product certification, withdrawal of product certification, suspension of homologation, or withdrawal of homologation. Changes of modifications made to the device by the manufacturer should be communicated to the certification body prior to marketing the new or updated device. This concludes our webinar on Brazil market access and approvals for electrical equipment and wireless products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in determining whether ANATEL certification or declarations apply to you, and if so, what the process for ANATEL approval and homologation is like, and what the requirements are. In-country testing and compliance with the technical requirements of Brazil is required for all radio and telecom products, and ensures product reliability, regulation conformity, and allows a level standard for use in the country. Whether products are manufactured in Brazil or in other countries, they must be approved and tested in Brazil prior to distribution or placement on the market. Visa Compliance Lab specializes in wireless approvals and compliance testing and is a 17025 accredited EMC RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types in countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@visacompliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.